solutions that harm people and biodiversity. And we thank you for coming to join us on this conversation. And we hope we can converse and come up with some solutions that are useful for climate action and also that work for biodiversity. And this side event will draw attention to the need to avoid siloed approach to the conventions and highlight the fact that biodiversity and climate emergencies are inextricably linked. The event will also demonstrate the role of the indigenous people, the local communities, that the groups understand the complexities of managing complex and multiple crises. And we recognize their role together with government that they can ensure that solutions being proposed are legitimate and contribute towards reducing biodiversity loss and also reducing the climate crisis or the climate impacts that we have. So we are going to hear from our presenters some concrete examples and concrete solutions to climate change and biodiversity loss. And we are going to hear different perspectives from across the continent and also from China. As we know the relationship between Africa and China in terms of also working together for climate action and also for reducing biodiversity loss. And for that reason, we are going to start our side event by bringing in our colleague Devika from Health and Harmony. But I'm going to ask, before she starts, I'm going to ask her to just introduce herself and also just let you know what are the linkages between climate change discourse with their organization and what are the issues at the COP that are priority to them and to your organization. Devika.
Can you hear me? That was scary. So, hi, I'm Devika Agir. I work with an organization called Health in Harmony. We started doing work in Indonesia in 2005. And we started because we went to the beautiful forest and we heard the sound of chainsaws. And our starting point was asking the communities, why are you cutting this beautiful forest that you call home? And the answer blew us away. The community said, if it's a choice between getting access to healthcare, what are you going to do? If it's a choice between survival, what are you going to do? And that's what we called radical listening. Radical not for the communities, radical for us. Because oftentimes we go with our preconceived notions of what communities need. And when actually communities know what they need, they naturally build interlinked solutions. So we did hundreds and thousands of hours of radical listening, asking them. And they came back with, we need healthcare, we need alternate livelihoods, and we need education. And if we have access to this, we can do what we always wanted to do, which is live in balance with this forest that we call home. And that itself is the intersection of business, finance, and government. Today we are in this COP. We're calling it the Implementation COP. For the first time, we have a bigger role for indigenous peoples and local communities. We have corporate sector representation alongside the government. And I think that is what we need, because what we found is when we replicated to Madagascar, it was the same story. When we went to Brazil in the Xingu River Basin of Terra do Meio in the Amazonia, it was the same story. And the problem we faced, we have a model which is proven over and over, but when we took this model to the financiers, to the funders, they said, this is great. So either the funding comes and it's very restricted, or they say, you're very small. How do we fund you? How do we keep, checking if this works? And so for us, one of the ways we are looking to bridge the gap between the big finance and the community solutions is by putting all these solutions together, aggregating them so that people can start finally investing in the solutions of the communities. And we call that platform Rainforest Exchange. And what we are trying to do is hopefully bring in the intersection of data and technology so that that can provide the monitoring and valuation and reporting rather than burdening the society and the communities with that. Because communities need to do the programs. They don't need the burden of reporting and monitoring. That can be done by technology. So I'd like to stop with my synopsis here and hand it back to Collins to see if he wants to ask questions or if he wants the other speakers to weigh in.
Thank you, Devika. I did not give you a time limit, but I'm going to give the other colleagues to a 1 minute time limit to just introduce themselves and also tell us their organization's work on climate change and also the priority for the COP. So I'll start with Saro, and then I'll come back to you, Devika. Saro, you can just take this moment to introduce yourself, and we take the round of introductions.
Well, I am Saro Piagbara. I was the president of the movement for the Sahara-Ogoni people in Nigeria, but presently I work for the African Indigenous Foundation for Energy and Sustainable Development. We have a long history. I mean, that is perhaps what you look at when you look at the intersection of business activities, local communities, and sort of the impact of what they go through. Ogoni happened to be an oil-rich community in Nigeria. And of course, we had Shell operating in Ogoni for all these years. At some point, of course, a combination of gas flaring and other externalities associated with oil production ended up in a situation where, of course, around the flare stacks, we started noticing this whole question about warming of the environment. So we were the very first group in Nigeria to start raising concerns about gas flaring and its relationship with warming of the environment, of course, and change in biodiversity around those environments, because we started seeing situations where the normal crops and animals were moving away from those sites. And that was when we started raising the campaign and the alarm about the activities of oil extraction in Ogoni and how it impacts on the environment and, of course, on biodiversity. And that how MOSA was formed. And across the period, we started engaging different actors. Ours was more of a campaign to stop gas flaring around those areas, and two, to see how to restore lost biodiversity. So in one side, campaign to stop gas flaring activity, oil company, and the other side, how do you restore biodiversity that been lost as a result of this? Part of what we also noticed around this period was this whole question of change in climate around, because Ogoni is largely agro-based economy, more farming, and we started noticing this whole change in weather, change in climate, which affected the farming seasons and all that. So our people need to now start finding ways to adapt to the changing weather conditions, particularly the setting of the planting season and of all that. We know that at a certain point in time, like April, the planting season sets in, but of course rain was not falling at that time. So we need to adjust to the time when rain starts falling. And then certainly there are certain crops that was being planted around that period. Now we have to do crop diversification in order to adapt to that sort of situation. Another thing we also noticed was the question of ours was not more of an economy that is based on animal husbandry, but people have to start changing, because the main source of protein for my community comes from the river. As I said, they do both fishing and farming. But because of the oil extraction, the fishes were no longer available. So what do you do to feed the family with, of course, protein source? And that how they started going into animal husbandry. I mean, particularly what we call the West African dwarf goat had to be reared amongst our people as a way to adapt to the changing situation that we are faced with. On the other hand, particularly when it comes to the issue of cropping, of course, the effect of stopping of the gas flaring also led to a situation where we see the growth of cassava in our area started blooming again, which was something that completely collapsed with that whole thing about gas flaring and that was going on around that period. So our people have managed in the circumstance to adapt to some of the changing conditions they've seen around issues of climate change.
Thank you a lot, Saro. Dr. Song, please introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm very glad and honored to be invited by the African Wildlife Foundations and ACBA to sitting in this panel. And my name is Yi-Qing Song, and I'm from UNEP-IMP program, which is a program between Chinese Academy of Science and UNEP. And I'm a program leader there. At the same time, I'm also founder and supporter of a pharmacy network in China, which is established in 2013 and close collaborate and linked to this UNEP-IMP and working in the community levels at, through piloting cases and action-oriented research. I'm very, very glad that because to join this session, that to know the approach that you mentioned about the close link between biodiversity and climate change and focus on community, because this is exactly where our approach is. Our approach is address the complex issues between the livelihood, climate change, and biodiversity at the community level. In working in community, we all know that in community, those issues are interlinked. Is their everyday life, is their production, they're dealing with their production, environmental culture, and for their sustainable livelihood. So I'm very glad to join this. Hope we have a nice panel discussion and hope we have a more collaboration in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Hassan?
Thanks, Colin. My name is Hassan Yassin from Somalia, working as Executive Chair of Somali Greenpeace Association. Somali Greenpeace Association is a CSO that was formed on 2019 to tackle on climate change issues. Our most program was focusing on building resilience communities and telling international and world donors not to see Somalia as humanitarian assistance lens, but see it as a building and climate resilience community, because you keep on putting money in the humanitarian resistance programs, yet the climate change impacting continues. So our work mainly was focused on climate action empowerment, environmental education on grassroots level communities, as well as ecological restorations, and also advocating for climate justice. Our main focus on these areas on this scope was following on loss damage issues and climate adaptation. It's unfortunate that although loss and damage has been adopted as an agenda, but it was removed permanently from liability and compensation, which is very important for the African people, particularly to Somalia people, where now and then climate change impact is destroying livelihoods. As now I'm speaking, millions of people have been displaced, more than 600,000 livestock have died, and there is also a conflict due to climate induced insecurity. So we were expecting on more than this, but I think this scope was failure to us, and we demand more than this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Hassan. I'll give Mari the opportunity to just introduce herself and the Regifak youth. Mari, introduce yourself.
Merci, moi c'est Marie Tamoafo, je suis coordonnatrice régionale du réseau des jeunes pour les forêts du bassin du Congo et je suis très heureuse de participer à cet échange. Je vais juste être celle qui va apporter un regard critique sur ce qui a été présenté et énumérer quelques points peut-être qui ont manqué dans les présentations des intervenants. Merci.
Thank you so much, Mari, for that. I'll ask the last but not least, Mr. Carlos, to introduce himself and also just share a bit about his organization and his priorities and the scope. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Spanish or English?
No.
English.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Juan Carlos Hintiach. I am Shuar indigenous from the rainforest of Ecuador, member of COICA organization, what is the umbrella indigenous organization in Amazon Basin. I am part of this historic and big organization. So coming here, I would like to elaborate also. Right now, I am serving or working for executive director of the Global Alliance. The Global Alliance, we create a partnership with the indigenous organizations who has territory and also forests in the tropics. That is COICA organization, Mesoamerica and the Caribbean, and IPLCs, all the Brazil indigenous organization, and then AMAN in Indonesia, and also the Congo Basin, 8 countries, and Repeliac organization. So this opportunity, if there is some moment, we would like to present, elaborate some principles we are following here with our partners as our organization and other indigenous organizations. They are following here also climate finances. They are following here loss and damage, but with proposals that we are doing already at the ground. So that how we are working on the ground, how we are presenting this, and because we want to be visibilized and we want to let them know to the states and the governments and international arena that they cannot work alone. They need to connect with us with our initiatives, how we are really doing and working. So they need to realize how much we are contributing and what we are doing, and that is with some resources that we are doing ourselves, but we need more help. It is something that maybe we can present if there's a chance to share here this opportunity with this new concept we call from the Amazon Basin, we call the red indigenous from the Amazon, learning from the process from the past, achieving and maybe to approach how we're going to connect with new momentum about resilient adaptations and mitigation, but we are really something that we are working for many years, and I would like to share. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Carlos, for introducing yourself, and thank you to all the panelists for introducing themselves. I'll just highlight that channel 2 will be for French on your receivers, and channel 0 and 1 will be for English. So you can also connect to your English because you'll get a better audio from there. But yeah, we're going to just dive into the questions, and I'm going to come again to you, Devika, as our first panelist, to also talk about and also help us understand, because indigenous people and local communities understand the complexity of living and managing biodiversity. And you have been working with indigenous people and also issues of biodiversity and their interconnectedness with health. So they respond to the impacts of climate change holistically with those elements that I have said. So what can we learn from indigenous people and local communities' response to twin crises of climate, biodiversity loss? And what are the opportunities for holistic solutions to address the drivers of biodiversity loss and climate change? So you can also speak on this with making some interconnectedness with issues of health. You have 5 minutes. Thank you, Devika.
Thank you, Collins. So let me share a very simple case study. We're all talking about it. Indigenous peoples have the solutions. They always build interconnected solutions. So first, as I mentioned, we started working in West Kalimantan in Gunung Palung in Indonesia. And we listened to the communities, and we invested precisely in their solutions. Fast forward, Stanford University did an independent study of our work. So they took the data from 2007 to 2017. And they found that the $5 million of investment over this 10-year period resulted in 65 million worth of averted ground carbon. So that's your first linkage. It resulted in 21,000 hectares of forestry grown, 90% drop in logging, 2,500 critically endangered Bornean orangutans preserved. And more recently, we heard that finally, they are rewilding and releasing baby orangutans now because the eco corridor has been established. And the most significant finding of this study was a direct linkage between health and the climate, because there was a 67% drop in infant mortality, malaria, and tuberculosis. That conclusively proves that the healthy people result in healthy forest, results in a healthy planet. we shouldn't even be sitting here and debating the interlinkage between forests and biodiversity and climate. That is a fact. We grew up in an earth which is interconnected. You live in your homes and you do so many things. And by nature, we have, it's a survival of the fittest. We really don't want to choose extinction. We really don't want to choose, seeing things in pictures and in videos. So if you don't want to choose that, we've got to realize it's all interconnected, and we have to find pathways to start financing this. The time for commitments is over. It's time all the different stakeholders got together and figured out solutions where we can make this work for our different needs. That's all I'll say. I think it's very, very interconnected. We don't need to prove it. Every year I come to COP, we have a theme. Last year was the forest COP. This year was all about let's preserve the biodiversity. And really, do you think biodiversity can survive in our homes? Could you bring the lemurs out of Madagascar? Could you bring those orangutans and put them in New York City where I live? If you can't, then they need the forest, they need the ecosystem, they need the water, they need the balance. And with heating, we won't have all of this. So I think the time to debate whether it's interconnected is over. It is. The question here is how do we finance and reach that 2030 target together? Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Devika, and thank you for posing the questions as well around the interconnectedness of the three that we talked about. But when we are still in the same vein, I'm going to ask Mr. Carlos to also come in and also just share more on the issue and the role of the rural communities and local communities who are the most successful custodians of nature and have the best practices and lessons for jointly addressing climate change and biodiversity loss. Mr. Carlos, what are some of the actionable tools and approaches you use in your work that have opportunities for replicability and also scalability to other parts of the world and also other organizations? Thank you. Mr. Carlos.
Thank you for the questions. So I would like to elaborate the dynamic in the indigenous organizations in the Amazon Basin. The principle number one, in solidarity with the indigenous organizations, they are not contacted with this reality. They are indigenous, free indigenous living in the rainforest. At least more or less 60 groups. They are in dangerous situation, in emerging situation, but many threats that like illegal logging and also hunting, illegal hunting, etc. But we realize, and then we get together, and we realize that we need to secure our territory, and we need to demarcate our territory and make sure that the governments understand that we don't have only forests, we only plants, and we are people living there for many centuries. Sometimes they don't realize, and we are asking to present opportunity, the reality from our own parts of way. So telling this, when you secure your home, you have demarcation limitations, and then because many of the indigenous groups, we live in boundaries and transboundary situations, not in just one country, we have borders with 1 or 2, 3 countries, and we are, for many centers, we don't have this kind of borders in the Amazon Basin. That is one situation, but when you secure your land, you make clear this, and then you elaborate your plans of life. The plans of life is as a dialogue, a deep dialogue between elders, knowledge for many centuries, youth and also leaders, and then we need to connect to learn, to pass this memorized and scientific knowledge from us to memorize. And then after the plans of life, we elaborate principles of free prior informed consent. We elaborate what project is coming to the ground. So we elaborate maps and planning to respect sacred areas, to respect where areas we are hunting. So that is plan of life more deeply, but connected with your own cosmovision, with your own part of life. So in this situation, we just elaborate recently some coordinations that we need to connect in a holistic way. We cannot separate water in the corner, river in the other corner, mountains in the other corner. We integrate like a holistic perspective. That's what we are calling Red Indigenous from the Amazon, and perspective from the own point of view with your own culture, and then it's important to understand the language, the memories of the language, and the interconnect, intercultural situation, because some indigenous groups, maybe they are managing the biodiversity and the hotspots and everything with resources, with cosmovisions, and we need to translate and to match this, and that helps you to empower yourself to talk to the governments and also elaborate how you can present these initiatives to connect with your people, connect with the forest, because we are one. We are humans connected with the Mother Earth. We are only one. We cannot separate. We are interconnected. That's our vision from my people, for the Shuar and other people in the Amazon basin. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos, for that inspirational talk and for also explaining the interconnectedness. And still in that vein, I was talking to a colleague here, and she said to me that this is a call for finance. The people are just talking about finance. So I'm just going to come to Saro and also come with the understanding of our first two speakers. That is considered that is limited financing for both climate and biodiversity objectives. So what is the role of financing to local action in deploying these limited resources to be the most effective? And also, as you answer that question, what are the key barriers created by the separation of the climate and biodiversity crisis, given that already some of the speakers have talked about the interconnectedness within these intersections? Mr. Saro.
Well, as other speakers have also mentioned, I mean, for us, there's no difference between our climate and biodiversity, because I come from a Goni community where ordinarily my grandfather studied the sea and know when the tides are moving and when the tides for them to go to fishing and not to go to fishing. And they studied the sun to know when they have to go to farm, when not to go to farm. So they have that sort of symbiotic relationship with both the climate and, of course, the plants. The challenge has been that the alteration of the climate, largely because of the sort of hydrocarbon emission and carbon emission that has taken place over the years, have made some of these things not to work the way it used to be in the normal sequence. And that is perhaps the challenge that we have. In terms of funding, I happen to have served as an observer in the Climate Investment Fund and the Global Environment Facility, which are all part of the discussion. The problem here is, for me, and for those of us within the indigenous circles, we still feel strongly that the world is not yet committed to addressing the issue of climate change. Because if we are, I don't think we'll be where we are at this point. I think we would have moved beyond this point. If you look at within the present financing mechanism, the adaptation funds today remain one of the lowest in terms of all the fundings around. And of course, for those of us in Africa, that is where the key biggest challenge is how do we adapt to the crisis of climate change. Yet, that is also one of the funding mechanisms that have the lowest financing. So I think that we need to put more money into some of these mechanisms, not just the money, but give to those who are directly impacted. They already have, like, of course, the indigenous already have their own traditional knowledge and indigenous knowledge that they use in addressing some of these things. If the money is there, of course, we'll do more. I mean, as I said, I served as observer in the JEB, and we look at the small grants program. With the little funding they were giving indigenous communities and, of course, local communities, if you see the report of JEB across the period, marvelous work were done with that small grant, which means that if local communities and indigenous will have more, they will do more. And that is why some of us are now advocating for direct access. Send this money down to the indigenous communities where this impact is heavily fed, where they can use little they have to do more and have amazing results than going through all manner of structures and systems that at the end of the day, the money doesn't even produce the desired result. So for us and for me moving forward, we need to provide direct access to indigenous people to have the funding to do what they are doing on the ground.
Thank you. Thank you for the passionate contribution and to talk about how money can happen and things can happen on the ground where money should be sent in the indigenous people. So now we are going to just cross over and also learn from China. And we are going to ask Dr. Song. And we all know, Dr. Song, that the global south is being impacted by climate change. And many countries have been experiencing extreme weather events. And you can see some of the work which indigenous people are doing. And there are already some extreme weather events that have happened in Africa, that have happened in other parts of the world. And the debate so far, you can tell that the issues of loss and damage should remain on the table and should remain a priority. But you can see some confusing thoughts around China's involvement in the whole discourse. So is loss and damage an issue for China, Dr. Song?
Thank you, Colin, for sharing that. Thank you for the question. First of all, definitely it is an issue. Yes, I would like to, starting with that, at the global levels, you mentioned about the global south impacted by the climate change the most. I fully agree. This is the truth and this is reality. The reason is that because the large amount of indigenous communities, the smallholder farmers, they are fighting in the front line. They are adapting to climate change. They're maintaining biodiversity every day. And they affected the most. They contribute the most too. So I fully agree what just Sarah mentioned about. The adaptation fund should fully support them and go to the community, support the small ground, let them supporting their fighting at the front lines. Otherwise, this affects to all the climate change. So this is really the truth and the reality at the grassroots level. And why is that is important? Because this is a big majority of indigenous community and the smallholder farmers and the producers, forest keepers at the grassroots level. They are closest to the nature. They are dealing with nature. They are the ones holding the solution for nature-based solutions. So this is really very important to support them at the action level, at the front line, at the grassroots levels. And talking about and they also contribute a lot. And they affect a lot, they affect the most because they are the poorest, and they are the most that, they are the majority of the people who are hungry. So this is why most of them don't have any insurance, and they are with poor infrastructures. I have been to a lot of countries in Asia and Africans. The people there, they are really fighting, they're adapting, but they are suffering. So this is at a general level. Turn to the China. Yes, China developed very quickly, and China dealing with the complex issues, and in the transition period, we are also very trying hard to dealing with climate change, biodiversity, and poverty issues. However, I hope that you all realize China is also one of the biggest smallholder farmer countries globally. We still have 260 million smallholder family farms. Our average farmer size only 0.6 hectares. And most of them are in mountain areas, in remote areas. We have a developed part, yes, but most of those farmers, they are still live in a very basic life, in a very remote and dealing with everyday farming there. Majority of them are women and children, because most of men are working in cities for incomes. So for the loss and damage, definitely we have these issues. For example, I don't know you know or not, we experienced a lot of extreme weathers in the last few years. For example, last year in Henan, the central China province, we have a extreme big flood, lost about 300 lives there. And 150 million people affected by the big flood. And the direct economic cost is $6 billion US. It's big. Behind those big figures, you can imagine that how many very helpful smallholder farmers in poor areas at the grassroots level, they don't have insurance. They have some support from the government, but it's limited. We cannot cover in all those evidence. We need really support them to let them to become more resilient, to adapt to those changes. So if some small grant and some fund could support them for insurance, for basic infrastructures, that could be help them a lot. The government is trying to do that now, since last year until now. And a lot of other extreme weathers, like a big drought, continually spring drought in southwest part of China. Farmers cannot sow in spring. Continually, in the last, the community we are working with, in the last 5 years, more and more, the spring drought, they waiting for sowing. Suppose it should come in April, now it's in June, and even in July not come. So for this kind of things, they really need to become more resilient. They're trying to save their own seed. They're trying to have a more forest, agroforest, and they're trying to dealing with more integrated solution to dealing with those climate change issues, to adapt to the changes. So I really hope that more and more people could see those grassroots climate change adaptations, who are those smallholder farmers and indigenous community at the front lines, to let their voice to come out, to let them visible, and to help them to get more support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Song, for such an elaborate contribution to the issues of loss and damage being an issue in China. Our last but not least speaker, Mr. Hassan, you will speak from a youth perspective, and you have heard Mr. Carlos talking about the importance of holistically approaching each and every crisis with the youth, with the indigenous people together. What is the role of youth in addressing climate change to protect biodiversity and improve societal life? And how can we ensure that youth-led organizations and local CSOs can access finance directly for addressing climate change and biodiversity issues? Mr. Hassan.
Thank you, Collins, for those two great questions, and I also would like to highlight them in two issues. First and foremost, we all know that young people are the front lines of addressing climate change issues, whether it's locally and whether it's globally, and we need to admit that one. And yet, we are the least responsible for climate change, and yet we are the ones we live with the long term. So we need to come with the solutions. Youth are the most knowledgeable now, and they are also the most willing to act for, as you can see, for every demonstrations, every society gatherings, youth are the highest percentage who come in there. They act as environmental changers. They also act as an agent of change. We are on the move, doing more, doing better, and also reaching further. Across Africa and Somalia, young people are increasingly raising their voices and advocating for climate actions. This has resulted a major impact, which we can see now in the country level in Somalia, where the former government has decided to establish the new Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, which never existed for the past 30 years. And for the past 30 years, even it was not the time I was born in. The other thing that our voices is reaching on the grassroots level and also the national government is that as we were heading before 3 months of COP, form of businessmen people decided to clear the reforested area in the city center. So young people came together, they raised their voices through the social media. You know that the situation and security issues, we cannot come out and demonstrate publicly. We have the power to demonstrate through social medias in our current era. So as I was now heading to COP, our voices has been heard, the place has been reforested. But we say it's not equitable on which has been growing more than 5 years to clear one day, and now you want to reforestate it in one day. As use of change, climate change and biodiversity, the following are the role we are doing in Somalia. Our first role is about education and awareness so that our communities grassroots level understand the nexus between climate change and biodiversity correctly. In our learning institutions, climate change and environmental issues are written in the last topics in the curriculum, which TIVA may never ever get the time to cover. So we do some of our volunteer time to reach our learning institutions, bring those last curriculum to the front curriculum so that our young people know and understand more about the environment and climate change issues. The other thing we is campaigning for climate justice demand. Climate change has been impacting Somalia for the past decades, causing loss and damages, migration, climate-induced insecurities, and yet we are not seeing those funds to come on the ground. The other thing we do is about tree planting, restoration activities on where it's needed and the right time. We also, our young people take beach cleaning campaigns, especially collecting the plastic bags from the beaches and also putting them in the right place so that those plastic bags do not reach the biodiversity in our seas, do not tangle our turtles and our fishes. What we also try to do much is about building networks, connecting among ourselves as a CSOs, also bringing young people who are working differently to come together, join their voices so that they become more strong. In terms of accessing CSOs and use on climate finance issues to prevent on biodiversity losses, firstly we need to also to consider about what are the obstacles in there. What is making local CSOs, what is making led youth organizations not access that finance? That's what we need to highlight and what we need to tell to the world. Despite of the youth of the first responders to climate disasters and climate actions, yet they are not achieving equal to what other international organizations on the ground are achieving. So what are the major obstacles? International organizations or government donors claim that youth-led organizations and CSOs do not have the capacity to manage finance for such programs. Is that true? Yet it's not true. Why? Because you find an example that you tell, hey, youth-led organization, come with initiative, we fund you with this program. Then as a youth initiative, you come with the program, or CSOs, you come with the program, you prepare the program, you deliver the implementation, yet that finance goes to another international organizations. You are told that you cannot manage because of this one, let these international organizations manage the finance for you. And yet you have implemented the whole program for yourself. That is frustrating. What else do they, what are the other things? It's a competition from international organizations themselves to local CSOs and local youth-led organizations. How is this happening? Youth-led organizations and CSOs do not have the capacity to reach international donors or governments, while the international NGOs have that capacity. So what do they? They reach fastly to the international donor organizations and consider CSOs and local youth-led organizations as just mere recipient implementers. Even sometimes you find them, first they give you a small grant, and that grant, even without giving you the capacity. And when you mess up with that capacity, they tell you, yes, we disengage you with this project. This is also a frustrating issue which is happening. And particularly, it's a good example that happened in Somalia, in fact, in ourselves. Also, the other issues is that they treat the treatment of youth and CSOs as second recipient Sometimes they get frustrated and also may disengage the project without prior notice and clear explanations. This is what is happening on the ground, and this is what we need to clarify to the world. What solutions are there if the problems are there? Is there solutions? Yes, there are much solutions. Firstly, instead of giving them the money to implement the projects for you, why don't you try to build their capacity systematically? What do we mean systematically? We don't need trainings that does not deliver our outcomes. We need trainings such as finance trainings, procurements, and policies that support youth-led organizations and CSOs so that their organizations can grow, and also the issues of that they don't have the capacity is eliminated. What the other solution is to provide the youth and CSOs with finance to run their organizations, not based not only in projects, but also organizational development. Because if you just give them projects, that money will only go for project, and they will never go get development. The others, which is very important, is to treat us, both youth-led organizations and CSOs, as equal partners, not just implementers. Because before you go to that project, bring us on the table, let us co-develop that proposal, let us design the implementation, the process, so that we deliver a good result project. After all, it's our responsibility as a CSOs and local youth-led organizations to deliver what our communities demand. Youth are the strongest and futures of tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Hassan, for that contribution, and thank you for highlighting the need for the youth and also highlighting the competition that exists with organizations as we apply for funding. But I'm going to just open this up for some questions and some comments from the panel. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. My name is Fatima Ahmed, and I'm representing Grassroots Women Organization in Sudan. Thank you for the presenters, and it's good to hear about all these issues which we are all facing and we are all living on the ground. I just want to comment on the last speaker, the Somalian guy. The issue of national NGOs or local NGOs toward versus international. I think this is one of the big problems we're facing. All the world talk about changing and raising awareness about climate change, implementing from before, or if there is more finance for implementation of many projects on the ground, which is very successful and being done by the local NGOs. But unfortunately, the good part of the money goes for international organization, claiming the donors that the local NGOs or national NGOs has no capacity. How can you can help me to build my capacity? And I think the most important item for capacity building is the resources. If I don't have resources, how can I hire professional employees for human resources, for financial money, whatever? So this is one of the big trick. This is why the money never went down. The majority of the money and the funds goes for those international organizations as admin cost. So our communities get very minimal. And this money actually given on the base of to help this community. I think this is one of the issues we have to advocate for it and address it. If there is any finance for this implementation of climate change adaptation or mitigation, it has to go for grassroots and local NGOs for their capacity building, for their empowerment, because they are the one will make the change or make whatever programs on the ground which can be effective. And we have success stories despite the minimal or very little resources. We still have big impact and results as local level. This is my recommendation is we all have to lobby for the strengthening and empowering grassroots and local NGOs. And really, it has to have good resources so they can help in climate change adaptation and mitigation. Thank you.
We can take 3 and then we can give it back to the...
Thank you so much. And thank you to our speakers for ably making presentations which are well researched. My name is Stephen Koma. I'm a commissioner in the Ministry of Local Government in Uganda. So local governments are in charge of decentralization where the people are. Much as you have elaborated a lot about indigenous communities and the effect of man in striving for livelihood, for Uganda, I would like to bring another scenario, which is destroying the forest cover at an alarming rate, but it has not come from the speaker's angle. For those of you who have the institutional memory or who are reading a lot, Uganda is one of the countries which I think globally it is number 3, and in Africa it is number 1 in hosting refugees, mainly from South Sudan, DR Congo, Somalia, Burundi, and Rwanda. And globally, it is appraised, it is applauded for its open door policy. But I assure you it is not beds of roses. Because hosting over 1.5 million refugees population is not an easy thing. Now, in Uganda, there are 2 categories of pattern of settlements. The land in southwestern Uganda is owned by the government, where government has 100% stake on it. Then in the northern part and part which is called West Nile, which is bordering Congo, the land is communally owned. Normally, community hands over to government for settling refugees. But when refugees come, of course they come with all desperation. WFP gives food, but how to cook the food is another issue. Where to settle, there is land here. For you to build a house, you must cut a tree. So the rate at which they are destroying the tree, the cover, is so alarming. Now, when we are raising this as a concern, you find the money trickling in is not commensurate to the level of devastation caused by the persons of concern. And you see, the challenge is we have now moved away from tree planting. We are advocating more for tree growing because you can plant. Planting is about number. We say, yes, this year we have planted this, but how many have survived? So now we are saying, for a proper adaptation, let us involve the government, let us involve the community to bring the capacity issue and money so that these people who have the stake and who have the country at heart can revamp the forest. Because I have been a refugee myself. You know, when you're a refugee, you are thinking of either going back or going to settle in Canada and America. That's what they normally do. So this idea of saying, plant here, tree, somebody say, tree for what? Tomorrow I will go back. But how sure are you that tomorrow you'll go back? So we are grumbling with that. So we need a lot of support in that area because it's really biting us as national. Although we have Ministry of Water and Environment, now under Comprehensive Refugee Response Plan, we even have the response plan for water and environment. But the challenge is financing and how to bring the local community people to also understand and how they can rejuvenate their forest cover. Thank you so much.
very short and very straightforward question. What are these sources of finance? Are these mainly grants? Are they private financing bodies? Are they financial instruments? Are they bonds? So if it's just a grant-funded source, there are some issues, right? And there's some limits to that. So are there private sources of the finance as well?
Thank you. Thank you so much to the three comments and question. And I will just give it back to the speakers. If any of you wants to shoot, you can just or open your mic and shoot.
I can take the response to the last question. So I think historically, climate finance has largely been funded by grants and individual donors, and which is why it is more small scale in its response. And I think the push here over the last few years has been the scale of funding needed is much bigger. So what most of us are trying to achieve is to see, can we find that gap? And how do we, because individual solutions as they are posed are very small for larger money to flow in directly. And that's a problem we've been grappling with. So what we are trying to suggest is that if we can come together as an alliance, aggregate the solutions, and then we can hopefully attract large-scale funding from multilateral institutions in the private sector, and then use technology to create the monitoring, reporting and valuation, which is also needed for these institutions to give money. So I think everybody's problems are same. We all recognize that there is a problem. We all recognize it needs to be financed. I think that the questions we are all grappling with is, what is the practical mechanism to scale? And then what are the blocks to scaling it? So, I mean, one of the suggestions we've been trying to see if it'll take a bite is to say, through Rainforest Exchange, what we're saying is if you can create a platform where every community can post their solution, and then either donors can directly fund them, so it takes away that burden, what you were talking about, of reporting. The other issue that a lot of organizations, community-based organizations face is the burden of not just monitoring and reporting, but restricted financing. So oftentimes when grants are given, they will restrict that you can only plant trees with it or you can do rice with it. And to your points, it's not possible, because when you work with nature, when you work with so much interconnectedness, the problems becomes that you can't only deal with loss and damage, you also need funds which are unrestricted and can be used for adaptation to the needs of the community. So I think Dr. Song addressed some of it with what China was doing is, can we find a way to invest in the communities so we don't even have to deal with loss and damage, we're dealing with the prevention of future catastrophes. So I can pass it to other speakers if they'd like to add.
Yeah.
Thank you. I will also like to thank you, my sister, in commenting on this. I could not agree more than her that as CSOs we should come together and support each other in addressing in our position as local national is not to be seen as just mere implementers, but equal partners. Thank you.
I think for me, of course, all we are looking at this point is that we need to upscale climate finance to the level of development finance. And that is the only way to go, looking at the fact that the climate change crisis is both human rights, development, and environmental crisis that we are facing. So, and that is part of the reason why we are saying that the developed nations should put more money, because this is also part of the crisis that is created because of their own consumption and the production patterns. And that is the whole campaign. Of course, more and more private people are also putting money into climate change now, which of course we are encouraging. The other thing relating to issue of capacity, I've always, for me, nobody carried knowledge from when they were born. Everything is by learning. So the whole excuse about capacity for me is lame duck, because people learn by doing, and if you don't do, you cannot learn. And that's the reason why we say those things shouldn't be an excuse for depriving communities who have their own knowledge system that they can use addressing climate change. So why don't you fund their knowledge system for them to use that to address climate change? And as I still said, I still reiterate the fact that what we need is direct access to funding as indigenous peoples to deal with our climate change challenges. The other issue relating to refugee, of course, it's not just the refugee situation you are raising. We're already having climate refugees. There are other countries and other small islands that already people are already moving from their common country because of a sea level rise. So the issue of the refugee situation is a big situation, not just out of conflict, but already having climate refugees all over the place. And that means that our programming need to change. Our programming and mainstreaming activity need to change. We need to mainstream the whole question of refugee into whatever development planning we are doing now, because we're already seeing climate refugees all over the place. Thank you.
Dr. Song, you want to?
Okay, thank you for all the very good questions and comments, really quite thoughtful and practical. What I want to share is that I think we all realize that community and smallholder farmers are quite important at the front lines, but how to support them, how to really let the finance and technical support reach them, this is really an issue, because we are also exploring this and discussing with other NGOs. And we found out that actually capacity building is very, very important. As one of the speakers mentioned, that this, most of the adaptation funds stay in the international NGOs and organizations, cannot difficult to go down, and due to the saying that they are not capable, that capacity building is important, because the local NGOs really need to enhance themselves. How to do that? I think that what we are exploring also, that the local NGOs networking towards each other, and because every NGO has one strong aspect, then they try to work in, linking with each other and networking and linking those local community to the other stakeholders, and then this kind of platforms and the networkers are important for really enhance the local NGO themselves and make the linkage of the community to the outside supported. In our case, that we're also trying to get the private foundations like Vanker Foundation and other foundations, and even in some enterprises, they are realize the issues more and more now, and they try to reach communities. But for them, it's difficult. They don't have the link. So these times the NGOs could try to make this linkage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Song, for that intervention, and thank you for the questions, particularly also from the Commissioner. We talked about the issues of refugees, and I think Mr. Saroy has already mentioned the issues of also integrating climate refugees. So there will be more and more coming, and we'll need to see how we can deal with that in our countries. But I'll take a last round of contributions or questions before we hand it back to the, yeah.
Thank you very much for the panelists for the very informative presentations. My name is Moses. I'm from Botswana. I'm particularly interested in the role of civil society, like you rightfully mentioned, that there is need to bring resources closer to the civil societies that are working with the communities that are primarily the ones responsible for taking care of the resources. I was very kind of surprised when I heard on one of the discussions that most government, particularly in Africa, have very limited relationships with civil society. And if you follow discussions around the COP right now, most of these large-scale funders are engaging ministers, which primarily talk into governments. What can we do to facilitate the relationship between governments and civil societies, which I think is the key to the future of making sure that every single dollar invested in these climate actions and mitigations truly affect the most needed or the most needy part of the system, being the communities, vulnerable communities living in those areas. What can we do to facilitate that process? Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions?
Oui, merci. Je suis Madame Yugbedek du Cameroun. Je vais abonder dans le même sens que mon collègue qui vient de parler là, parce que il est évident qu'on parle des fonds disponibles, la publicité des guichets financiers, mais la principale difficulté, c'est les avoirs. Comme mon collègue venait de dire, il y a les points focaux dans les ministères. Quand on est société civile, quand on y va, ce n'est pas souvent très facile pour le point focal d'accorder même un temps pour vous expliquer les procédures, pour vous aider à faire des proposals. C'est compliqué. Vraiment, comment faire pour que la société civile ait un accès sans passer par les points focaux, par les accréditations, par les difficultés construites autour de ces fonds? C'est compliqué. Par rapport aux femmes, moi je coordonne tout un réseau de femmes dans la sous-région Afrique centrale. Les populations rurales qui attendent notre soutien, on ne parvient à rien faire parce que les guichets sont fermés pour nous. Compliqué, les procédures compliquées, les points focaux compliqués. Qu'est-ce qu'il faut faire? Merci.
Did the interpretation work? Okay.
Yes, we got the interpretation. Thank you for that question. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Freiberg from Health in Harmony. It's not a question, it's just a comment. I wanted to get back on what Dr. Song said earlier. The panel was about engaging businesses, and that's what we've been trying to do. And what we find is often they say, well, unless there's a return, we're not really interested. And I think that taking the problem the other way around, talking about loss and damage and saying, well, actually, this is going to have a big economic impact on your business. So no, you don't get a return, but you're going to avoid the loss. And I think that's a really important conversation, and we're very much looking forward to seeing, the UN and other organizations, showing the way and being leaders in this, so that businesses start talking about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte, for that. Is there any other contribution from the floor? Yeah, I'll let the panelists respond.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think we're getting to a point internationally and of course nationally where we need to move beyond the state, just the state structure. I think today we recognize the critical role of community and civil society in development work. Before now, the discourse has always likely been state versus maybe a donor and all that. I think what we are saying now is that you need to move beyond the traditional state-donor relationship and then move over to maybe CSO and community relationship, so that it's not just bilateral, but trilateral now. And that's the part of the thing, as I said earlier, I used to observe for the Climate Investment Fund and, of course, the JEF. Part of what we did in the Climate Investment Fund was to move strongly for what we call the dedicated grant mechanism for indigenous people and local communities. And that was like a pilot, and for 4 or 5 years now, we see that when grants are made available to indigenous and local communities to do work on the ground, I mean, the report that we are seeing from that has been very, very encouraging and amazing. And that is part of the reason why, for my brother there, I think that we need a strong advocacy that this whole question about direct access, that we need to move beyond state structure and deal with communities and local civil societies to do work on the ground. The problem Madam is talking about is also very strong. I raised that issue yesterday. You are doing the Green Climate Fund. You are asking people to go through the so-called National Designated Authority, sometimes who don't even want to see you as CSO. They don't want to see you as indigenous community. In fact, some countries don't even recognize you as indigenous peoples. So how will a National Designated Authority recognize you when they don't even recognize you are from indigenous community? So all those are some of the barriers that, of course, in doing this financing process, we need to look at this and do away with them, because we can't deal with them and continue in the way we are doing. So there needs to be a dramatic change from state structure to state community and the CSO relationship.
Thank you. Other panelists, you can respond. Dr. Song, maybe?
Okay, just to mention about engaging business and quite important. Yeah, because also that civil society organizations are very much both in the rural area and in the cities. And engaging the business, and we can, one of the approaches we are using is that also trying to link the producers, small farmers and indigenous communities, the small producers, linked to the consumers. This kind of things, like through food and through energy, those kind of things, and those kind of topic can attract some of the enterprises and some business that pay attention to that, because, for example, for food, the people are looking for healthy food, and some food processing and consumption enterprises, they are looking at that. Okay, some people are looking for nutrition and more valuable varieties and good food, and then there's available in the remote and forest mountain communities. Why we make the linkage, let them support to each other. But these really need a lot of effort and skill and capacity from civil society to make the linkage, and then to really to put multi-stakeholder platforms to let them communicate each other, to exchange, and then to get the support, mutual support. Actually, if it goes well and turned out that both communities in the community in the cities and consumption communities, and also the community in the production side, they mutual benefit towards each other. Gradually, because they really realize that, okay, this is a way they closer to the relation, they realize that, okay, this is what the food produced, this is how they are consumed, okay, and then they have a better understanding of each other, and they have the direct connection through this. This is why for the adaptation part, we are more and more focused on agroecology also, because agroecology really ways that link both sides through, from we talk about from seed to food, that this link the whole value chains, and then but this really need quite more capacities for civil society and local NGOs to working together, trying to capacity building each other, and then to form into a platform that to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll give Mr. Carlos to just respond on the issue on the indigenous communities being without capacity and complexities around CROAs or grants. Mr. Carlos.
Thank you. I would like to share some visions from some examples that we are really working from our ecosystem. As you know, scientifically we have to make a differentiation where you live, how is your home, how is your forest, and know all the ecosystems are very fragile ecosystems in Amazon basin. I mean, this is a real challenge. The moment that you begin to cut or you want to do agriculture, rains a lot, and then this clear up and the land gets destroyed. But there is some, especially when we get information from the elders, and we need to understand that kind of system information that they were managing for many centuries. We need to proceed, and we need to understand and reconnect with the young generation, because the young generations, I mean, here, and this is a challenge, more of the youth are moving to the cities to find a job, et cetera, but if you don't understand your ecosystem, using your own technology, your own knowledge, you need to be proud of what you have. And then when you are very proud of what you have, you need to invite and connect with your partners within the transparent momentum conversation. And then you say, I would like to develop fruits from this forest. I would like to work with ecotourists over here to do these businesses. But everything begins in your own plans of life, in discussions in your own home. If you don't discuss this with your elders as your own community, this is not going to work. And later, there are another colleague, another people is going to arrive. But the government, they are looking at us only because, not because we are very beautiful people or indigenous people, because what we have there under our surface. We know so far that many studies are telling us that we are living in the pristine areas, that ecosystem values areas that we are in our control. We are living there. How much value they have, but under surface they are looking at the governments, other people with a lot of technology. We have to be careful with that. When they come there, do the studies, they are looking mining, oil, etc., values of the wood, etc. But they are not telling you the truth sometimes. So you need to open up this dialogue, very transparent with your partners, and then you begin to develop this with who you are going to go forward. So these initiatives are talking about the finance. That's why the partnership with the Global Alliance, we present after the COP27, the Shandia proposal. Why that means, why we present this? Because there is a lot of resources in the world. There's many resources in the world. And then how much of the percentage is going to the ground? Where this money are disappearing in the middle, intermediaries, government, etc. But how much or how this money is going in the ground to support the women's, the initiatives? It's not because we don't have projects. We already have projects on the ground for many, many years, many centuries. So we need to connect, to invite the scientific from the other side to connect with our knowledge, and then we can develop and protect this life. And what we are doing with this crisis, in Amazon Basin, we have a tipping point. It's getting this destruction. It's going to disappear. But we need to see alternatives. That's why we want to work to a collective. Collective, that means working local community, indigenous people, with all the academia, etc. So we have a lot to contribute here. Finally, I want to mention this point is that I think so that the governments, again, the governments and other actors that they say that they have the solution, maybe, but they cannot work alone. They need us, clearly, and we have the solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We can clap your hands. Thank you. I will just give 3 minutes to our sweeper, Mari Tamofo, to just give us a summary of the discussion. So if you didn't hear much of the discussion, you can listen to Mari as she makes the sweeping remarks as we come to a round of close. 3 minutes.
Merci, monsieur le modérateur. Je vais parler en français juste pour faire le point un peu de nos échanges. Je pense que c'est très difficile de faire le sommaire de tout cet apprentissage qui a été le nôtre aujourd'hui sur l'action climatique et surtout sur les solutions qui sont proposées par les communautés. Je pense que le rôle des populations locales et autochtones est important pour éviter les fausses solutions, et je pense que les exemples qui nous ont été présentés ici sont très importants pour nous, non seulement pour nous au niveau local, mais aussi au niveau global. Il y a des éléments, des questions qui restent pour moi importantes. Ce serait évidemment pourquoi ne pas avoir établi très clairement le lien entre les gouvernements, la société civile, les communautés à la base. Pourquoi est-ce que jusqu'ici on n'arrive pas à le faire? Un autre aspect très important, c'est de pouvoir, que je n'ai pas trop vu, ce sont les opportunités qui peuvent exister de collaboration entre les acteurs et les parties prenantes, mais surtout nos leaders. Un aspect très important, c'est comment faire en sorte que les solutions durables soient contextualisées, et aussi comment évoquer la question des droits de l'homme en lien avec le travail des communautés. Je crois qu'il y a un besoin aujourd'hui à faire en sorte que la question des droits de l'homme, la gouvernance, la co-construction pour établir un dialogue de confiance soit fait. Je voudrais revenir un peu sur les présentations, sur ce qui a été dit par DVK, par exemple, en lien avec la complexité de travail avec les communautés. communautés. Je crois qu'elle a présenté vraiment comment au sein des communautés, il y a un apprentissage, il y a des connaissances, il y a des savoirs locaux qui sont importants et surtout une connaissance de leurs besoins. Aujourd'hui, les communautés savent exactement ce qu'elles attendent, ce dont elles ont besoin et ça, c'est très important de collaborer et de travailler avec justement cette dynamique. Au niveau de Carlos, je voudrais revenir sur, parce qu'il a présenté le rôle des peuples autochtones et surtout l'approche qu'ils ont adoptée qui est une approche réaliste. Et celle-là permet justement d'enlever le défi et de permettre de toucher ces communautés à la base. Il a présenté justement le travail de l'Alliance globale des communautés, le travail qui se fait aujourd'hui entre les 3 bassins. Et je pense que cette collaboration et ce partenariat visent à justement à mener les acteurs, les populations locales à travailler ensemble, à coordonner leurs actions. Je voudrais aussi peut-être revenir sur ce qui a été présenté par Saro, comment faire justement à ce que la finance, le climat, et merci à toutes les contributions qui ont émané des panels et qui sont revenus sur le besoin de renforcement des capacités, le besoin aussi certainement de mettre l'accent sur le financement qui peut être fait au niveau local, mais qui doit être un espace de financement intersectoriel qui enclenche une collaboration locale, nationale, internationale. Donc moi, je pense qu'il y a aussi sur le rôle des jeunes, le rôle des femmes, le rôle au niveau communautaire, il y a un besoin de synergie, un besoin justement de mettre l'accent pour qu'on évite justement les fausses solutions. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, il est clair qu'il y a un lien qui doit être fait entre la biodiversité, le changement climatique, mais aussi les communautés. Et pour le faire, pour éviter ces fausses solutions, il faut travailler avec les communautés à la base, il faut travailler avec tous les acteurs qui ont été présentés ici et qui renforcent justement et qui mettent l'accent sur le fait qu'il y a un besoin de collaborer, d'avoir une vision partagée et d'avoir une feuille de route claire. Donc merci à tous les intervenants pour tout le travail qui se fait à la base pour cette communauté et cette avancée. Voilà, juste une petite synthèse.
Thank you so much, Marie. This was a clear recap, and I'll just, as we close down, I'll just give 45 seconds to each speaker to say the parting shots, and then we can thank the crowd. So we'll talk with you, Saro, from my left here.
Well, my parting shot is that indigenous people continue to hold the key to the present climate change crisis and should be supported on all fronts for them to do the local work they're doing on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you all. I have learned a lot in the session. My carry away is that I really think that it's important to support the indigenous communities' bioculture systems, knowledge systems, based on that, and to give them more support, enhance their support, and make the linkage of what they need. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to respond on about the facilitation between the government and CSOs. It's about the government to learn that they are one is on part of the CSOs. And as CSOs, we are already engaging with the government, trying to guide them on neck, inviting every consultation that we are doing, yet it is them who are reluctant to interact with the CSOs. So it will be more on the responsibility of the government to open their spaces so that as CSOs we can come in. Thank you.
I think just building on what everyone has said, we need platforms where we can aggregate and bring all stakeholders. There's a definite role for government, there's a definite role for private sector financing, there's a definite role for local communities, and there's a definite role for civil society. I think we each have our lane, and if we can bring these lanes together through platforms, for us it's Rainforest Exchange, then together we can build a highway, we can all work together to stop that wreck.
Thank you. I'll give Carlos the last.
Thank you. I always call for solidarity, unity between us, and also always I like to say very proudly, and we are donors of life. Indigenous people, we are part of this contribution for this crisis, that what is happening right now. We are donors of life, and they need to listen to us and work with us directly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A round of applause to our panelists and to everyone who participated in this meeting. Yes, thank you so much for joining us for this meeting. Our time has come to an end, and we really thank you for your time and for also learning. And let's continue learning, and let's continue pushing the climate justice forward. Thank you.